looking at the Declaration of Rights and Sentiments from the Seneca Falls Convention from 1848. This was, at least the Wikipedia article says, the first women's rights convention ever. I don't know if that's true, but very well could be true. It's an amazing thing that there was a feminist women's rights community, very lively, forceful, and widespread community of women fighting for their rights and politically organizing in 1848 America. This is Seneca Falls in upstate New York, I guess. Amazing document. Obviously, reading the preamble to it, it is invoking the Declaration of Independence using the opening of it, and I think that's to be kept in mind what sort of document it is, really. An assertion of rights, but also a complaint, as the Declaration of Independence is, of abuses and trying to achieve something. And what is it trying to achieve? I think you can look at the document. But in looking at the part of it that talks about the abuses, just as the Declaration of Independence talks about the abuses of Great Britain against the United States, here the abuse of women by men. The complaint here is he has denied her the facilities for obtaining a thorough education, all colleges being closed against her. Looking that up is not quite true. There were very few American colleges that were willing to admit women. Oberlin College being very prominent, being a different sort of place. But I think it was more or less true. If you look at the colleges that existed then, especially the prominent ones, your Harvards and Yales and Princetons and University of Pennsylvania and things like that, none of them accepted women. There was apparently, just looking at the Wikipedia article on women's higher education in the United States, there was a kind of a great wave of the opening of women's colleges in the late 19th century, places like Bryn Mawr and Radcliffe and Smith. And so there was a big boom, I would say, immediately after this in women's higher education. But I think that this is more or less true. That is, maybe not all colleges being closed to women, but more or less all of them. The denial of education, I just think it's so important, and it's important to think about because I think that in modern times, especially in America, we've become so alienated from our educations that we view them as penances or chores or almost prison sentences rather than opportunities and rather than gifts. Most people going through grade school and high school consider it a kind of a penance, I think. And then even higher education, what we're doing now, is seen as a hoop you need to jump through to get to your real life or something that you would rather skip. And that's too bad because what we see right here is that education is viewed as something which is so good that everyone should have it, I think, is the idea. And of course, this harkens back to Mary Wollstonecraft's arguments from 60 years before, 1792, that the major thing that needed to be done to decide this question about whether men's power over women was justified was to allow women the opportunities in education to develop their virtues so that we could really see whether they were equal to men. Because as long as they were denied education, there was just no way of telling because women's growth was stunted, let's say, intellectually, morally, even physically, by their lack of educational opportunities. I think there's a recognition here that social equality demands equality of education. But let's think about that. What is education? I think that practically speaking, if you exclude a portion of the population from education of any sort, you are weighing them down and you are handicapping them from being economically able to compete with the ones who do have education. There's always been that aspect of education that it's part of this social, economic, and political equality that we're looking for. So if you don't have education, you're hampered in the competition of life. But I got to say, there's more than that here. And again, thinking of Wollstonecraft, she didn't necessarily primarily think of education as something that allowed you to compete economically. She thought of education as the ability to um, realize your potential intellectually and morally, and especially intellectually. That was the great gift of education. It wasn't to make you rich, it was to make you smart in the sense that allow you to reach your full intellectual potential as far as you can. Um, so this denial of a thorough education that the document is citing is not just the denial of the ability to compete in modern free market capitalist society, whatever. It's not just that. It is that, I think, but it is also the denial of a fundamental right of self realization, the idea that it's only through education that we have a chance to realize our potentials and abilities. And I wanted to emphasize that because I think that that's getting lost. Um, Education has become, higher education especially, has become so ruthlessly practical that it seems like it's being reduced to job training. And that is not the idea of a university, and that is not the traditional idea of education. The traditional idea of education is to free your mind and to develop your abilities. And if women in 1848 in America are being denied that, which of course they are, and poor people too, and black people too, and Asian people too, and immigrants too, a lot of people are being denied that. But what they're being denied is something that's not just a practical good, it is an inherent good because every human being should have the capacity to learn and to reach some form of personal enlightenment that is very difficult to do without some form of education.